Hey there, and welcome to the Chicago Crossing Model Railroad April update. Happy Easter to you. Hope you had a great holiday weekend if you celebrate Easter. Today's edition of Chicago Crossing Layout Update brought to you by Burlington Northern. I grew up on the Burlington Northern racetrack in the Chicago area, so was very used to, as a kid, seeing lots of interesting stuff like SD40s, fuel tenders, and cabless SD40 B units and things like that, all moving all the way to Portland and Seattle and stuff like that. It's kind of cool to see those trains in long distance service as road engines. Well, lots of stuff has happened on the layout since I last talked to you. We'll get through a few things. One of the key things is there is lighting on the layout now. So you've probably noticed that there are things like street lights and so forth that have been on the layout for a little while. Some of those worked, some of those had yet to be wired in. I've been going through all of the wiring now, trying to get it just right. And at this point, at least have the main industrial area pretty well put together in terms of interior lighting of buildings and in terms of supplemental street lighting. You can see, for instance, that there are some of the simpler wooden pole based lights over by the parking lot there, where you see the green and blue car and the dumpster. And on top of that, also did a lot of detailing of the street lights where there would be a Chicago city street. Historically, Chicago had green lampposts. They were metal. These lampposts don't quite match the exact prototype, but at the same time, they look pretty close. And so if you paint them green, that gives the Chicago look. Each one of these was hand painted and then hand rusted. The thing about especially the industrial areas of Chicago is I remember going through areas like Goose Island, and some of those lampposts just looked like they were, halfway to falling down. You'd have a lot of chipping of paint and rust. And so I spent a lot of time working to get those things just right. So in terms of the actual lighting, you can see a few different uses of some of the wall-mounted lighting, and that includes on the loading dock, as well as on the fire escapes and the ground floor side entrances. That's true for both this large building here, as well as for the grain mill here. You can see that there's a light both at the loading dock, the top of the fire escape, and over on that side entrance over there. In addition, I also wired up the Pabst Blue Ribbon sign to now be permanently wired into the layout. That's basically operable via a switch now. So easy enough nowadays. You can find all of these different power buses and you can run all sorts of stuff to that and then just plug it into the wall outlet, run a switch to it, all that kind of stuff. So altogether, really happy with the lighting package on here. At night, it just looks fantastic, and it makes me really happy to see a little something happening. I also have an adjustable LED bulb sitting in the ceiling here, so I can turn that to kind of a moonlight blue, or at least something that looks a little more nighttime-like. In addition to putting on new lighting, I also had a chance to revise all of the paintwork on the sheet piling on the side of the Chicago River over here. Previously, you probably saw in photos, it was painted, just kind of a rust color and almost like an oxide red or something like that, with some white on it just to provide some highlighting. Going back to photos like I showed in the last update, it's very clear that Chicago sheet piling is a much darker color and then has a very, very light color right toward the bottom where it interacts with the water. And that's probably just due to minerals or whatever else happening to just kind of coalesce on the bottom, dirt, things like that. So this was kind of a risky maneuver because the water is already complete, and that sheet piling is three-dimensional, so there's little interdigitations that kind of come in and out from where the resin was poured. And on top of that, there's Mod Podge on the top. that is isopropanol sensitive, and I do most of my airbrushing usually with Tamiya paints and sometimes with some non-alcohol containing, as far as I can understand, air paints from Vallejo. So here it was kind of a combination of all those things. I basically just put a bunch of index cards down to cover up as much of the river as I could, and then just began first with a hand-brushed base coat painting of dark black brown. That's a Vallejo color. And Vallejo paints for brushing are really wonderful. The pigment is beautiful. It's very, very dark. It's very thick. And so it brushes on essentially in one coat in a very, very nice way. So I started with that as the base coat. You can kind of see off to the left some darker areas. A lot of precision brushing up on the top just to try to get the area where the sheet piling actually meets the dirt, and to make sure I didn't do anything harmful to the static grass and things that's up there. So after that, I came back over it with an airbrush using regular Vallejo air rust color. And then down at the bottom, that is a mix of Vallejo gray blue, which I use for almost everything, as well as a little bit of white. And in that case, I just kind of got right in there. I've got a double action airbrush and just very, very carefully etched in all of that white stuff down at the bottom. And of course, when I took away the coverage over on the river was, now white over in those areas. So what I did is I basically got right down in there, made some custom paint colors, just using craft paint actually, to match the kind of turquoise greenish blue of the water, and then got right into those little crevices with that in order to kind of repaint where the river is. In this case, the river was a little bit sloppy before, and there was actually, blue paint kind of on the sheet piling itself. Well, that's definitely not accurate. Water doesn't have a color when it's actually making something wet. So in a case like that, it actually kind of fixed things quite nicely, and that made me very, very happy. Once that was done, I re-added some gloss Mod Podge over to that area just to help it match the rest of the river. And even some areas where there's some debris and flotsam, added that too. A good example is right over here as well. Started to add some plant life over to this bunch of rocks over here, in the idea of making that a little bit more vegetative and a little bit more consistent with the rest of the terrain. So altogether, I'm happy with the sheet piling. It looks way more realistic. It just kind of does what it needs to do, and it looks very much more like it would be in Chicago. So if you follow my community page, you probably saw that I had managed to snag a water tower from a recent train show in town. Actually just cost me like $5, which was a steal. It's a Walther's pre-built water tower kit. It was just, comes as kind of a silvery plastic. So that was actually a great base upon which to kind of start things in terms of putting this water tower on top of the grain elevator. As you remember, this is based off of a grain elevator in the Haymart neighborhood that used to be on Ada Street in Chicago. And that had a water tower on there, presumably for firefighting purposes, for sprinklers. Obviously, at modern era, you don't need a gravity-fed system anymore, so that water tower had more or less been decommissioned. The reservoir draft pipe down into the grain bin had been removed, and it was more or less just sitting up there as a canvas for graffiti artists. So what I did is I basically took the thing, cut it down using a razor saw, and rebuilt it to be nested in between the kind of long shed that carries some of the conveyors off to each of those different silos. And the end product, after airbrushing the entire thing NATO black, coming back with a lot of different rust colorations and things like that, and then putting in some hand-painted graffiti that matches, as much as I can tell, of the graffiti that was actually on the real tower. I think it looks absolutely fabulous. I was really happy with this. It just gives a nice prototypical nature to the grain elevator. And I think altogether it looks really, really good. So a few things yet to come. It's now the tallest structure on the layout, so it's going to need a lightning rod, and it probably also needs an aircraft warning beacon, and that'll be something that will happen pretty soon, I think, since I'm in the mood to actually just be lighting up all of my different areas of the layout. And last but not least, I mentioned I was also starting to work on Finkl steel. Well, Finkl had a couple of these American high cab cranes that were mounted onto rail flat cars, like small 20-foot chassis. And those were used for moving scrap from the gondolas that would come to visit the facility into chargers that would be then brought into the mill itself for melting down in the electric arc furnace there. So this is a Railway Express, I think it is, pewter-based model of the American crane. And right now, kind of half assembled. This one is going to take a little bit of work. And the reason being is these cranes are terribly molded. You know, the little burrow crane that I have in my scrapyard was not too bad. This thing was just horrific. The amount of filing and sanding I've had to do just to remove all of the different burrs and all of the flashing and stuff like that suggests that these molds are not very good condition. And so what I'm getting out of that is kind of crummy. So the crane itself, you know, a work in progress. I've decided I am going to try to super detail it a little bit with the ladders on the side, and need to put in glazing in the windows. I actually need to reconstruct the front window because the thing is molded so terribly that it's going to just need to be essentially redone. And at that point it'll get painted a yellow for the body as well as a blue for both the crane boom as well as for the flat car, just based on pictures. This is kind of a nice kit bash. The top again is that Railway Express miniatures. The bottom is actually a Kenray ingot flat car that you can purchase, and you can see the ingots off to the side there. I simply removed them, and that's actually the perfect size chassis for the prototype. So, you know, next month or so, that thing will get super detailed, painted, weathered, probably repaneled, all sorts of things just to make it look presentable. I know it's in the back of the entire layout, but still, something like that, I want it to look decent. Well, with all that in mind, that's pretty much the update for April. Thank you very much for tuning into this layout update. Hope you enjoyed all of the new features on the layout. It's been a lot of fun this month. I've had a few good weekends just to be able to work on this stuff. And so looking forward to getting a lot more done and a lot more interesting stuff onto the layout for your pleasure and for mine. Until next time, take care.